Hello.
Hey, Christina, how are you?
Hey, Emily, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. I've been working on a project, and that's why I wanted to chat with you. I think I want to do a survey, and I heard you'd be a good person to talk to about it.
That sounds great. What kind of survey?
Well, I've been developing some online modules, and I want to know how they went, if they worked, if the residents liked them, that kind of thing.
These are great things to consider, but let's take a step back. Tell me a little bit about your project.
Well, it's a series of 3 online modules that each resident who rotates through my clinic completes. The first one's mostly an introduction to the clinic and its operations, but the other 2 include cases and articles that the residents have to read.
Okay, and so is the survey that you want to design an assessment, so a test to see if your residents learned what you wanted them to learn, like an exam or a quiz? Or do you want to get your residents' opinion on the modules so you can revise and improve them in the future? That would be more of a program evaluation.
It's a good question. Both, really, but my ultimate goal is actually to see if residents who do all of the modules do better on their in-service exam.
Great, that's really helpful. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when crafting a survey is to articulate exactly what you're hoping to accomplish, and those are the specific aims of your survey.
Okay, I'm gonna write a bunch of notes as we talk.
Okay, so one survey can definitely do multiple things, but you'll need different kinds of questions for each of the aims of your survey. And another big question for you, do you plan on publishing any of the results?
Maybe. Can I decide that later? First, I just want to see what the responses show.
I understand, and you can decide later, but it actually will make things much easier on yourself if you decide that now. So here are a few key tips that I usually share with people. So first, let's think about if you're actually doing research, and that means it means the federal definition of research. If so, you'll need to go through an IRB. If you're affiliated with a hospital, you may need to go through the hospital IRB, so that would be Lifespan, for example. And if you're affiliated with the med school, you would go through the Brown University IRB.
What do you do if you're affiliated with both, a hospital and Brown?
That is a great question. So it actually depends more so on who you're serving and what the purpose of the research is. So if you're a physician and you have a dual appointment and you're serving medical students, the Brown IRB would be an appropriate place to start. If you have questions, a good first step is always just to email the IRB directly and ask if your project is even considered research, meaning that it meets the federal definition of human subjects research, and if you actually need to go through a specific IRB. So I think it probably makes sense to talk about some logistics like sampling. You'll want to think about who do you want to sample and how are you going to recruit them to complete your survey?
I always wonder if it's coercive to try to get people to complete my survey. It kind of feels like bribery.
No, it is definitely acceptable to use small incentives, like a $5 gift card, for example, to encourage people.
Well, I don't have any money to give out, but I'll definitely think about how I'm going to get folks to do it. How do I know when I have enough responses to do anything worthwhile with them?
Okay, so the answer to that really depends on your question. So if you're going to be doing an inferential analysis, consider conducting a power analysis ahead of time so that you know exactly how many participant responses you need in order to have adequate statistical power. Adequate statistical power just means that you're able to detect a stats effect if it's there.
Can I stop you for a minute, though? I'm actually not sure what an inferential analysis is.
Of course. So, okay, descriptive statistics are what you usually see in table 1 of a published paper. So they usually include averages, standard deviations, or frequencies and percentages. Inferential statistics are a step further than that. So this is where you typically will see a p-value and phrases in the narrative such as statistical significance. These analyses can tell you if there are differences between groups on a certain outcome variable, or, for example, if there's growth in knowledge from pre-test to post-test.
Can you talk to me more about how to plan your analyses? I remember that when I did a previous project, it was really helpful to know ahead of time exactly what tests I was going to run. But how do I decide which ones to do?
Sure. So planning the statistical analysis can be done before you have any data, and that's going to help to save you time. Different kinds of questions require different tests and responses, so it's really best to meet with a statistician early. Think about if you want to know if 2 groups are different, if you want to predict an outcome, or if you want to know if one group changes from pre-test to post-test, for example, like an educational intervention.
Like an in-service exam after completing my modules, right?
Yes.
So when do I need to think about appropriate places to publish my study?
I would think about where you want to publish your findings earlier rather than later. So think about if you want to publish in a content journal, so something like Emergency Medicine, or if you want to publish in an academic journal, so something like Academic Medicine. If you have curricula to share, then MedEd Portal is a great option.
Okay, these are really good tips. I'm writing these down. I also wanted to ask you, though, about constructing good questions. I know there are rules out there about what makes a question good or bad and how many answer choices to give, but I can never remember exactly how I'm supposed to word things.
So I'm really glad that you're bringing this up now prior to administering the survey. So here's some kind of tips and tricks that I usually give people when I speak with them. The first is to make sure that your questions are neutral and they're not leading. So don't ask a question like, fruit and vegetables are an important part of one's diet. How many servings do you eat per day? Think about making it more neutral and saying, how many servings of fruit and vegetables do you eat per day? Another tip or trick is that questions should address one topic only, and so they're not double-barreled. So for example, you'd want to avoid a question that asks, do you eat fruits and vegetables? Versus what you could do is ask if the person eats fruits, and then in a separate question, ask if they eat vegetables. This will increase the number of items, but it also increases the validity in your responses, because how would a person answer that double-barrel question about fruits and vegetables if they only ate fruits? Another thing that I'll suggest is to make sure that your response option has a 5-point scale. And that's because survey research says that there is increased validity from 3 points to 5 points, but no significant increase in validity from 5 to 7 points. On top of that, if you go out to 9 points, there's usually a decrease in validity. So it seems like 5 points is really the way to go. And if you think about that for a minute, it makes sense. If someone indicates a rating of 7 on a 9-point scale, how is that qualitatively different than a 6 or an 8? With too many points on the anchor scales, it can be difficult to interpret. So let's try to stick to 5. And I'll say that a last tip or trick that I like to share is that response options should also be balanced with a neutral midpoint and positive anchors on the right and negative anchors on the left. Sometimes we're tempted to use scales that have an even number of anchors so that the participants have to choose a side. But what if the participant is actually neutral on this item? In that case, the result would be less valid.
Okay, so once I check that my questions aren't double-barreled or leading, and I make sure that any multiple choice questions have 5 response choices, what's the next step? Do I need to pilot it?
Yeah, so piloting a survey is important to ensure that the questions you created are interpretable and they're providing the type of data that you need to answer your research question. It'll give you a good measure as to how long your survey is and if any of the questions are confusing. So you want to be sure that you administer your survey to a smaller cohort of individuals that are representative of the population that you're going to be surveying.
I remember with a previous project thinking that it wouldn't be worthwhile to pilot it because it just seemed like doubling the workload. But it turned out, actually, I remember the feedback from people who took the pilot was really valuable, and it really improved my ultimate survey tool.
Yes, I strongly recommend piloting as a step in survey development. And while you're talking about piloting your survey, let's chat about how you might do that logistically and how you might administer the survey to your target population. I personally would highly recommend distributing the survey electronically if possible.
Definitely. Do you have a recommendation for a particular platform like SurveyMonkey?
So actually, it's great that you brought that up. Something that a lot of people don't know is that everyone at Brown University has a Qualtrics account. All you have to do to log in is go to brown.qualtrics.com and continue to log in behind Shibboleth.
That's great. I had no idea that Qualtrics was available to all faculty with just a Brown username and password. So you also mentioned distribution. I know that sometimes I get multiple reminders about completing a survey. Is there like an industry standard for nudging people to complete a survey?
Well, I think maybe perhaps rule of thumb. So let's think about an example administration protocol. So we have an initial send out with a deadline of 7 to 10 days. So say we send out a survey on Monday and we really want all of our responses the following Wednesday. So what we'll do is we'll send out the survey on Monday. We'll follow up with a first reminder a few days later on that Wednesday. The second reminder will be right before the deadline, so the Monday of the following week. And then you want to close the survey and assess the number of responses on your target close date of Wednesday. If you have enough responses, you can go ahead and cut off response collection and start analyzing your data, which in my idea is the fun part. If you don't have enough responses, you can send out one final reminder with a hard deadline of 2 days later. And this may give you the boost that you need in order to get to your benchmark.
This is all great, but I have to admit I'm a little overwhelmed. Are there any resources out there for someone like me?
Great question. There are a ton of resources available. And so you could check out survey design websites. There are a lot of great resources out there. I usually refer to the ones with a .edu in the address. And your department actually may have a statistician or someone who can help you throughout the research process. There are also plenty of resources online from the Brown School of Public Health and Advanced K resources.
Christina, this has been such a helpful conversation. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, you too, Emily. Bye.
Bye.